What's on your mind? How are you? Safe travels. What's on your mind? What's your back?
Hi. Off with you.
What's on your mind? Well met. Keep your feet on the ground. You got my attention. Be good. I've the finest wares in the land. Off with you.
And in the case of green dragons, this is manifested as rampant and wild plant growth, with even
Graciela.
And some trees taking on twisted shape and moving slowly before people's very eyes. Wild rodents and birds will act erratically and shriek all at once as the eggs begin to hatch. There may be a brief rainfall of bitter and slightly caustic water which causes damage to sensitive crops. The wormling life stage lasts approximately 6 years. The green wormlings look quite similar to black dragon wormlings, as they are very dark green, almost black. And as the wormling matures, its scales become steadily lighter in colour until they reach the striking green shade of an adult. Also, their distinctive wavy crest grows in, extending just above the eyes all the way down its spine and tail. The highest point of the fin is just behind the skull, which, when they tilt their head forward, tucking their curved jawline into their neck and letting off a jet of poisonous gas, then roaring and raising their head, making the fin shake and the greenish-yellow gas billow and glow with a green glint from its eyes, it's pretty intimidating. The wormlings stay with both parents for quite a long time compared to most other chromatic dragons. Green dragons reach independence at 100, but full adulthood around the age 160, and become elders after their 950th year. A truly ancient green dragon has lived for at least 1750 years, give or take a century. The oldest known natural green dragon lived for approximately 2,250 years, although there's at least one notable exception I'll be talking about at the end of this video. The environmental diffusion of a deceased green dragon results in the area of lush, beautiful, and deadly plant growth. Grasses, trees, and other vegetation, nearly all of them poisonous, grow swiftly to abnormally large size. These areas also touch on the Feywild far more than do other parts of the woodlands. Green dragons prowl around their territory, both in the natural world and sometimes the Feywild. They are good flyers, but are amazing forest predators way beyond a normal natural creature. They're like both a super reptilian monster and an evil druid and psychic sorcerer all rolled into one. Perhaps because their terrain often has a canopy of vegetation, green dragons fight equally well on wing or on land. When battling on or near the ground, green dragons attack from the cover of trees or from the hidden contours of the earth. Woodland obstacles impede humanoid foes' ranged attacks more than they impede green dragons' area attacks. They learn every possible path, hiding place, and refuge. This preparation makes them far more effective hunters and offers them the means of retreat if any battle turns against them. They're way harder to spot in the forest than you might imagine for such a large creature. Their wings have dappled patterns, perfect for blending in with the irregular light under a canopy, with darker leading edges and lighter trailing edges. They can also position themselves and instinctually cause plants around them to move slightly to blend in with their contours. Plus, they are silent. A green dragon's legs are longer in relation to its body than with any other dragon, enabling it to easily pass over underbrush and forest debris when it walks. With its equally long neck, an older green dragon can peer over treetops without having to rear up and disturb the foliage. They're fully amphibious, able to breathe both air and water, so they can sit in a stream or pool, waiting for hours, even as an adventuring party rests right next to it. The dragon may even put a fish on an adventurer's hook, just to complete the illusion that there's no massive predator waiting there to murder everyone. One lunge and snap from those jaws, though, and it's likely to be all she wrote for that angler. The adult green dragon has a blunter snout but a very muscular jaw. It is plus 11 to hit with a 10-foot reach and hits a target for 2d10 plus 6 piercing damage, plus an additional 2d6 damage from poison that injects into the savage wound. Now, one might notice about all the poison damage inflicted by the Green Dragon for 5th edition is that it damages, but the damage is not ongoing, and it doesn't also inflict the poisoned condition. The writers are also not specific about what sort of poison this is, but old school D&D players know what it is. The greenish-yellow cloud is chlorine gas. It basically reacts with any moist surface, and for living creatures that need to breathe, this means the respiratory system. This is because chlorine reacts rapidly with water to create hydrochloric acid. It also results in temporary blindness from damage to the eyes, lasting about 5 days in real life. If the lung damage has not resulted in a very nasty death, that is. So being blinded should be one of the conditions associated with green dragon breath attacks, and being poisoned with a possible save versus taking a level of exhaustion, and in worst case scenarios where the characters are trapped in a cloud of gas, dying of suffocation even after they've been removed from it, unless they get immediate magical healing for their damaged lung tissue, which will have been destroyed by the acid. The bite wound is listed as having associated poison damage when really it should be acid damage, because the wound will be fizzing away with hydrochloric acid. Old AD&D changed the chlorine poison attack to an acid attack because it was more accurate with hydrochloric acid. All that being said, adding ongoing debilitating additions to a fight with this apex intelligence super predator is something one should only do when the players are already tipping the balance well and truly in their favour. So a party fully decked out with healing magic and supernatural enhancements, as well as things that effectively negate other advantages the dragon has, such as the ability to easily detect and see through their deceptions, is a good indicator you might want to up the lethality of the fight. After all, I think I may have mentioned a few times already, the green dragon will not face off in a fair fight. They will always have a backdoor and will flee at the first sign that the player characters have a good chance of seriously injuring it or even killing it. It may be very frustrating for the players when they make their way through quite a gauntlet of mayhem just to take a shot at what turns out to be a very convincing illusion of a green dragon, but they will just figure out how to cut off all escape routes before they take on a green dragon next time and be very on edge, waiting for the inevitable revenge of the dragon in the meantime. Taking on a green dragon, it's you or them, and they will happily track down and murder your entire home village if they can't get at you directly, which is another reason why these are some of the most feared and hated of the chromatic dragons amongst humanoids particularly. One of the reasons forest dragons prefer to hunt humanoids says a lot about the mindset of these monsters. Sure, they can hunt down tigers for sport, but only intelligent creatures will willingly present themselves to the dragon as food, just because they know that if they don't, the dragon will brutally murder everyone else they love. To the massive ego of a dragon, this is the sweetest spice to the meal: total dominance and control. To a green dragon, all weak creatures are either prey or there to be manipulated, and in their eyes, nearly all other creatures are weaker than them. Of course, the dietary requirements of a dragon are strange. They attain a lot of energy from the environment itself, but greens do tend to eat a lot of forest game, such as wolves, deer, bear, big cats, which are far more common in the wilderness of Faerun than they are on Earth, and wild cattle. Still, green dragons are among the chromatics most likely to interfere with nearby humanoid communities. Some greens terrorize their neighbors into obedience, others play and experiment with local political and mercantile interests. A green dragon might use bribes and intimidation to gain the cooperation of a few select members of a community, and then see how much authority it can obtain by proxy before the humanoids discover its minions. Greens might not have lofty goals for such sort of manipulations. They enjoy the process and the practice for its own sake. Green dragons might negotiate peaceful coexistence with their neighbours as long as territories and resources don't overlap. Anyone entering into such an agreement, however, should do so with great care. Green dragons take devilish delight in finding loopholes in such agreements, and they double-cross for fun. One thing they gain from this manipulation that other dragons tend to be a bit envious of, and start lots of fights between the green dragons and other dragons, is the treasure that humanoids provide. Humanoids love to settle close to the environments that greens prefer: temperate and cold forests, thick and old, with rivers and streams, lakes and ponds, rich in game and interesting landscapes with plummeting waterfalls, escarpments and cliffs. Mountains bordering forests near thriving coastal towns are prime real estate for humanoids and for green dragons. Greens might accept smaller woods as less desirable alternatives, as well as jungles and overgrown bogs. That's where you'll find the younger ones. When a green dragon can't find any suitable forest or woodland, it might even settle in an area of rolling hills or similar terrain, using slopes and valleys for cover and concealment. In the same way that its more fortunate cousins use the trees of the forest, green dragons prefer caves and forested hills and cliffsides for their lairs. Where they can't find such convenient things, they might topple the mightiest trees into great heaps and make their homes in the hollows of these wooded hills, kind of like massive reptilian beavers. Some green dragons even lair inside the trunks of largest fey-touched trees. But treasure, yes, green dragons go after it with a passion. They may let a humanoid live if they get a sufficient haul of loot out of it. They particularly like handcrafted items ranging from sculpture and artwork to ornate swords and magic armour, and of course emeralds. They love to own everything in anything into which someone put a lot of work and dedication. They do take and hold large piles of coins and gems, but unlike some other dragons, they see this as bait for bribing and controlling merchants and less affluent communities. It delights dragons to see humanoids betray each other out of greed and desperation. As much as the dragon dislikes parting with its wealth, they consider it a worthy investment, and they know that what they can achieve with it will usually be an even larger hoard at the end of it. So a green dragon may consider a whole village as part of its hoard, ironically acting as a fierce protector from raiding savages, because the dragon considers them thieves of its own property. The old advanced Dungeons & Dragons listing for green dragons talks about a classic scheme from one of them. Green Dragon was having problems with the tribe of elves in its preferred domain, so it went into the mountains and convinced the orcs there to come down to the forest under her protection. The orcs agree, believing the dragon as it spins tales of visions and signs from the orc gods. The orcs move in and immediately start chopping down trees and selling the lumber, paying the dragon a large tribute from this income. The elves, of course, act to protect their forest, but back off when they encounter the dragon also acting in league with the orcs. And for the dragon, knowing the elves will be looking for their own advantage, enchants and controls one of the human wood merchants and sends them into the elven village, where they say they have a powerful brass dragon who is willing to get rid of the orcs for a pretty hefty payment. The elves pony up and agree and prepare for battle. The green dragon then uses magic to alter itself into a brass dragon, joins the elves, then routs the orcs from the forest, and as the elves hand over even more wealth to that very dragon who has now wiped out some of the best fighters and rendered them unable to pay for any hired swords to protect them from the dragon's next plan to subjugate or murder all of them. Green dragon mated pairs or parents and offspring will work together on these sort of predatory scams. So shape-shifting magic is high on their list of things they will let a humanoid live for if they hand them over to the dragon. Among their own kind, green dragons are rude, crass and loud, and the females even more so than the males. There are certain roots that have a mildly mind-altering effect on green dragons. These are usually poisonous to non-dragons. Under their influence, the green social behaviour is even worse than usual. The courtship of green dragons, which is initiated usually by the female, is as, of course, coarse and boorish as might be expected. Once two dragons have paired, however, and the females are impregnated, their nature changes between them. There's a strong loyalty between members of a mated pair, a radical departure from normal green behaviour, and an immense dedication to their offspring when they hatch. Parents take great pains to inculcate their offspring with the survival skills of manipulation and double dealing. Green parents give their lives for their offspring, if necessary, making them unique among the evil dragons, and they do this. The parents usually continue this level of protection until the offspring achieve young adulthood at 51 years of age or more. They will continue to associate with them for a good while after as allies, as it benefits them all, but once the offspring have left their parents, the paired dragons almost always separate and find new mates later. There's no loyalty or responsibility felt between any member of the family group to any other. Sort of. Once the young have left, there's a sort of unspoken tradition that they don't double deal on their own parents or offspring, unless the opportunity is just too good to pass up. Green dragons will hand over their own mother for a steady diet of gnomes, and they will betray a sibling for a steady diet of sprites and elves, while orcs are pretty much just drive-through snacks, and humans are happy meals, plentiful and convenient, and also come with a little game included. Don't expect a green dragon to always engage in dialogue before a fight. They may just swoop out of nowhere and attack immediately. They like to eat humanoids. They like an easy fight. They always open up with a breath weapon blast first. First round of combat, the dragon exhales poisonous gas in a 60-foot cone. Each creature in that area must make a DC 18 Constitution saving throw, taking 16 D6 poison damage on a failed save, or half as much damage on a successful one. A dragon will also use its frightful presence, so each creature of the dragon's choice that is within 120 feet of the dragon and aware of it must succeed on a DC 16 Wisdom saving throw or become frightened for 1 minute. Aware of it doesn't just mean in visual sight of it, it just needs to know that it's there. A creature can repeat the saving throw at the end of each of its turns, ending the effect on itself on a success. If a creature's saving throw is successful, or the effect ends for it, the creature is immune to the dragon's frightful presence for the next 24 hours. The dragon then uses its other 2 attacks to make a bite and a claw attack on the most formidable opponent standing before it. They are plus 11 to hit on all physical attacks. The bite has that 10-foot reach, as I mentioned, so that it's always a good option for them. The claw is close range at 5 feet and does 2d6 plus 6 slashing damage with no additional poison effect. They are most likely to have used their full movement to get into combat, but here's the nasty bit: the use of their legendary actions. An adult green dragon has 3 legendary actions. These they use at the end of other creatures' turns on that same round, which is why they can just wipe the floor with even groups of other creatures. So the first opponent takes their shot at the dragon, and then on that first round it uses a wing attack. The forest dragon beats its wings, and any creature within 10 feet of the dragon must succeed on a DC 19 dexterity saving throw, or to take 2d6 plus 6 bludgeoning damage and be knocked prone. The dragon can then fly up to 40 feet away. Boom! It's now out of close combat range for any melee attackers, just like that. If an opponent charges at it and attacks, the dragon still has 1 legendary action. As the wing attack costs 2 of these, it takes a tail attack. Wham! 15-foot reach and slams the victim for 2d8 plus 6 bludgeoning damage. It then soaks up any remaining attacks for that round from its enemies, and the DM rolls a d6 to see if it recharges its breath weapon on a roll of 5 or 6. Green dragons can use that frightful presence at the start of their turn for free. They will lay into opponents with bite and claw attacks, but certainly use that tail attack in place of claw attacks if the opponents are keeping their distance, and use up to 3 tail attacks for its legendary actions to just dominate melee combat. You do not want to go toe-to-toe with a green dragon. They have a natural armor class of 19 and can have up to 306 maximum hit points. They will certainly drag victims down into the water and drown them. They will shrug off attacks that require saving throws from them, as they have legendary resistance 3 times per day. They have particularly sharp senses with skill boosts that are also pretty extreme. Blind sight of 60 feet, dark vision out to 120 feet, passive perception of 22. I mean 22 people. Plus active perception bonus of plus 12. Deception and persuasion have plus 8. Insight has plus 7 and stealth has plus 6. And they are also able to use additional actions in their lair. Right at the start of the round, the dragon can do one of the following, always having to use a different effect on the next round. It can make grasping roots and vines erupt in a 20-foot radius centered on a point on the ground that the creature can see within 120 feet of it. This area becomes difficult terrain, and each creature there must succeed on a DC 15 strength saving throw or be restrained by the roots and vines. The creature can be freed of these vines if another creature takes an action to make a DC 15 strength check and succeeds pulling them away. The roots and vines will wilt away when the dragon uses this lair action again, or when the dragon dies. It can instead make a wall of tangled brush bristling with thorns springing into existence on a solid surface within 120 feet of the dragon. This wall is up to 60 feet long, 10 feet high, and 5 feet thick, and it blocks line of sight. When the wall appears suddenly, each creature in its area must make a DC 15 dexterity saving throw. A creature that fails the save takes 48 piercing damage and is pushed 5 feet out of the wall's space, basically thrown up into the air and torn apart, appearing on whatever side of the wall it wants. A creature can move through the wall, albeit slowly and painfully. For every foot a creature travels through the wall, it must spend 4 feet of movement. Furthermore, a creature in the wall's space must make a DC 15 dexterity saving throw each round it's in that contact with that wall, taking 48 piercing damage on a failed save, or half as much damage on a successful one, so we're talking seriously thorny. Each 10-foot section of wall has an armor class of 5 and 15 hit points, vulnerability to fire damage as you expect, and resistance to bludgeoning and piercing damage obviously, and of course it's immune to psychic damage. The wall sinks back into the ground when the dragon uses the lair action again, or when the dragon dies. Or it can create a magical billowing fog that surrounds one creature it can see within 120 feet of it. The creature must succeed on a DC 15 wisdom saving throw or be charmed by the dragon until initiative 20 count on the next round. Being charmed by the dragon renders that victim unable to harm the dragon, and the dragon has advantage on checks if it orders them to depart the area, using its persuasion or intimidation skill check. So, pretty potent. The region containing a legendary green dragon's lair is warped by the dragon's potent magic, which creates one of the more unusual following effects. Thickets form labyrinthine passages within 1 mile of the lair, the same so-called maze that I was talking about. The thicket acts as a 10-foot high, 10-foot thick wall that blocks line of sight. Creatures can move through the thickets with every 1 foot the creature moves, costing it 4 feet of movement, and the creature in the thicket must make a DC 15 dexterity saving throw each round it's in contact with the thicket to take 1d6 damage from the thorns, so nowhere near as thorny as the lair thorns. Each 10-foot cube of thicket has an armor class of 5 and 30 hit points, resistant to bludgeoning and piercing damage, vulnerability to fire damage and immunity to psychic, and thunder damage, so I guess the Wall of Thorns would have a resistance to thunder damage as well. Within 1 mile of its lair, the dragon leaves no physical evidence of its passage unless it wants to. Tracking it there is impossible except by magical means. In addition, it ignores movement impediments and damage from plants in this area that are neither magical nor creatures, and so they can move through these barriers easily. The plants remove themselves from the dragon's path. Rodents and birds within 1 mile of the dragon's lair serve as the dragon's eyes and ears. Deer and other large game are strangely absent, hinting at the presence of an unnaturally hungry predator. If the dragon dies, the rodents and birds lose their supernatural link to it. The thickets remain, but within 1d10 days they become mundane plants in normal, difficult terrain, losing their thorns. Okay, so I promised to talk about some legendary green dragons of the Forgotten Realms. There are a lot of them. They include... wish me luck with these pronunciations. Mornaugath, a green Dracolich, priestess of Shah who lives in the misty forest, also known as the Moor Dragon. Filyisitat, who was kept magically compelled to guard a half-demon blue dragon's lair in Arm. Ish-in-Alir, an ancient male green dragon allied with Samasta during the Rage of Dragons. He was a type of dragon called mystic, called a hide-carved, who was part of an assault on the Monastery of the Yellow Rose, known as the Citadel of the White Worm in Damara. He was killed when one of his own allies, thanks to a copper dragon's trickery, caused a colossal old red dragon female called Malazan to kill him in an epic fight in 1373 DR, not long before she was killed herself. Venom Inhandar is actually the name of a mated pair of green dragons, also known as Venom, who terrorized the Tangled Vale in Cormanthor. Although they were killed like over 1,000 years ago, they killed so many centaurs and elves that they are legendary to this day. Sir Vinhandra, mainly famous for having fought and killed Lord High Justicar High Avenger Darren Erach, wielder of the Axe of Heavenly Fire and inhabitant of the Abbey of the Just Hammer in Tasseldale in the Dalelands, dedicated to terror. It must have been one hell of a fight to see, as it's still talked about 119 years later. Verthan Dan Talinix, also known as Verdant Cloud, lived 80 miles due west of Mithranor and was worshipped by the population of Trenahes, a nearby village of humans on the east bank of the river Ashaba. The villagers offered up visitors and valuables to Little Verthi, who defended them from monsters and other communities. Unfortunately, due to the Rage of Dragons, she went crazy and murdered everyone in the village. They called her Little Verthi, their protector, the idiots. And Deru Narthix, aka Darren, when he was younger, he was quite involved with a draconic game called Zorventhal, which is so complicated it will need its own video. Long story short, he tried to take over Waterdeep. Lots of plot happened, and he left with his tail between his legs, current whereabouts unknown. Athhalglass, and notably mainly for the most infuriatingly devious last words ever spoken by a dragon. Just before being killed by the Company of the Gauntlet in 1223 DR, Athhalglass proclaimed it owned the greatest treasure house in all the realms. Do you think that statement got quite a bit of attention among legend seekers and adventurers over the years? Oh yes indeed, my friends. It probably got more people killed over the centuries than any victims the dragon took while it was alive. Our Ix was one of the consorts of Tiamat. Venom Fang, of course, is a young and fairly typical green dragon that many new players of Dungeons & Dragons will be familiar with by now. Vorgan Sharax, the maimed virulence, with a wing that was tattered from a fight with a bronze dragon when he was a wormling. Vorgan Tharax was large. He was the offspring of the ancient green dragon Clorgailia Matar, who's really interesting. She lent aid to her offspring in 1489 DR, sending him to Flan to secure the Pool of Radiance and return it to its former glory, with a promise that he would then rule over the location. Sure enough, he managed to take over Flan by murdering its leadership, but he was killed finally by an army led by Jasael Greycastle, along with a plucky band of adventurers, who finally wiped that smug sneer from his jaws. Note, to those familiar with this tale, I'm not mentioning Tyrannothraxis because I fully intend to make a video about that entity at some later date. Clorgai Amatar is massively interesting, particularly in 5th edition, as we're about to go venturing into the far north of Faerun. We may see some involvement from this ancient green dragon, also known as Old Gnawbones. Sages believe that Clorgai Liamatar arrived in Cryptgarden Forest in 1303 DR. She made her lair there in Deeping Cave. She has always been fascinated by powerful elven and human females and the spells that transform dragons into humans. Her main aspiration was to become one of these powerful women herself, living within the hustle and bustle of a humanoid city life, and of course the cities of Waterdeep and Neverwinter, where she tried to influence the local politics by making use of a criminal gang under her control. Well, they were far more refined and fancy than a gang really, more like a criminal agency that hosted dinner parties for the city elite. She pulled a classic green dragon caper on a noble family of Waterdeep, famous for being explorers and hunters of wild beasts, so the humiliation they suffered cannot be overstated here. Anyway, the story goes, Clorgai Matar earned the enmity of House Brokengulf when she posed as a silver dragon and offered to rid their grazing lands of herself. Having learned where her payment was waiting, she ate the men guarding it and stole it. She then used more illusions to make it appear that she was fighting with herself, though actually all she was doing was destroying the fences that secured Brokengulf's animals so that she could eat them later. Finally, she disappeared behind the mountains, altering her appearance to look like looked like she'd been injured, and returned claiming victory. When Lord Cerilyn Brokengulf could not offer the missing reward, he had to instead fill a ship with money and offered that to her instead. A 10-day later, Clorgai Liamatar returned without the disguise and demanded twice the amount given to the Silver Dragon for the audacity of trying to assassinate her, threatening the family's lives should Cerilyn refuse. When Cerilyn tried to stall for time to hire a real dragon slayer, Clorgai Liamatar collapsed the villa's biggest tower on top of him and 3 of his sisters, resulting in Cerilyn being crippled and the women's deaths. Cerilyn then paid up, almost bankrupting his family. Waterdeep, outraged, responded with force, quickly sending men after her, but they instead found Endraktrikar, a male dragon who had just started making designs on Clorgai Liamatar's territory, and slew him instead. Clorgai Liamatar ran into more than she could deal with when a bunch of other green dragons ganged up on her for this outrage and drove her out of the region, where she then got involved with the Cult of the Dragon, and actually I'm not sure if she got turned into a Dracolich or not, probably not yet. Finally, Anglerayros, an ancient green dragon who lives in a mountain known as the Fang in the Forest in the Earthfast Mountains on the southern border of Impultur, facing the Sea of Fallen Stars. This hollowed-out ancient volcanic peak is perfect green dragon real estate that she forced a band of dwarves to transform into a trap-filled nightmare dungeon called the Lure of Jaws. They did such a good job, she even paid them well and sent them on their way with their lives. 2 things make her one of the more formidable dragons in Faerun. 1, the dwarves have spread the tale of how this lone dragon sleeps in a lair filled with fabulous treasures far and wide, which has been a magnet for thousands of adventurers who have gone there to their doom. 2nd, and the reason she's called the dragon that never died, long ago she swallowed a Thayan wizard who was a master of life-draining magic, and she actually absorbed his abilities. She's since been able to extend her life far beyond normal by stealing the life force of other creatures, particularly adventurers who just deliver themselves up to her lair with fair regularity. She may actually end up being immortal. You can find details about her in Dragon Magazine number 424. Best of luck. Please hit the like button if you've made it this far, subscribe if you like what I do, check out my Patreon for all the full scripts for these videos, buy some sweet merchandise from my Teespring shop, wear your geek with pride. And as always, thanks for listening, and I'll be back with more for you very soon.
How are you?
Hey there everyone, AJ back again for the Mighty Gluestick channel. Wikipedia will tell you that in the Dungeons & Dragons fantasy role-playing game, Lenorms are ancient primeval cousins of dragons, sometimes referred to as the Norse dragons, that lack wings and hind legs, making them more serpentine than true dragons. It's also known that Lenorms are evil and cruel, and I mean all of them. But thankfully, they've always been pretty rare, and there are fewer and fewer of them as the years roll on. There have been no less than 4 articles and complex ecologies of the Lenorm, or the Lindworm, or Landworms in Dragon Magazine, and today we delve into the lore of all of these horrible monsters as we continue to explore and build on our comprehensive archive of draconic knowledge. There are at least 11 distinct breeds of Lenorm, where we'll be talking about each one of them, as well as the myths of their origin and where they can be encountered. Lenorms originate in Norse mythology, with a passage in the Poetic Edda called Grimnismal, where Odin names the serpents that gnaw on the roots of Yggdrasil, the world tree, and they are Nidhogger, which means malice striker, Grabga, which means greyback, Grafvulud, meaning he who digs deep beneath, Ofnir, Svafnir, Gravitnir, and his sons Goin and Moin. We also have Fafnir, he was once a dwarf, but got cursed into the form of a dragon, and was later killed by the hero Sigurd, and the epic world serpent, of course, Jormungandr. Just talking about Fafnir, the transformation into a dragon, so it accentuated the greed of this dwarf. It doesn't mean that all other dragons, and I'm responding to a particular post from Trevor, it doesn't mean that all dragons are not greedy or are not affected with this greed for gold if they're not descended from Fafnir. It was just accentuating something that they had already. So the greed of dragons was legendary on multiple different occasions, and it doesn't really they're not necessarily coveting the gold for its wealth's sake in the same way that humans are. But more on that as we go into the various motivations of other Lenorms as we progress through all the different types. Norse mythology is incorporated into the cosmic scope of Dungeons & Dragons with the outer planes of Isgard and the Grey Waste. The cosmic entity Yggdrasil, the World Ash, is so unique in that it's also a transdimensional living being, which forms a kind of transitive plane in and of itself, linking the various realms which make up the Norse subset of cosmic locations, which include Niflheim and the Grey Waste, also known as Hades, as well as Muspelheim, Isgard, and Nidavellir, which plus connections to the prime material plane to various locations, which the Norse know as Midgard. There are also fascinating locations worthy of further exploration, which I'll get to in due time, I swear. But today, we focus on the frightful descendants of these Norse dragons and their place in the D&D worlds. So the Lenorms all have some things in common. They're long and serpentine, with a characteristic draconic head, 2 front limbs, but it's variable whether they have any wings or rear legs. Like the metallic and chromatic dragons, they continue to grow throughout their lives, but unlike their cousins, they develop physical power a lot faster, and they never stop growing. Plus, unless killed, they live for a more extended period of time. Sages have estimated the ages of the most ancient linorms to be around 4,000 years old. But the linorms found among the roots of Yggdrasil may live until some external force kills them, so they're effectively immortal. Linorms are usually abandoned by their parent as soon as they hatch from their brown, rough, leathery, oblong eggs. They remain hatchling sized for only a year and a bit, and it only takes them 250 years to grow to their full adult size. By that time, they are reaching their first 1,000 years of. By the time they're reaching their first 1,000 years of age, they may be grown to be over 100 feet long in some places, or more, depending on the specific breed. The oldest and largest linorms are genuinely enormous, reaching 530 feet long. Thankfully, those are legendary monsters and they're very, very rare. Linorms breathe the deadly sprays of acid, poison, cold, fire and hot dust, sometimes more than one type from the same linorm. They're well adapted to their chosen environments and are extremely deadly if they've chosen the time and place of any encounter with them. When a linorm decides to attack a settlement, frontier garrison or some such, there are no first-hand accounts of what happened. All that any sage knows about is from learning by examining the scene of the massacre afterward, because there will be no survivors. Unlike the chromatic and metallic dragons, there's no alignment division between the linorm breeds. They are all, without exception, evil to the core. The only question is how lawful or neutral or chaotic evil they really are. Every linorm employs its own kind of combat strategy, with one exception. All the breeds live solitary lives, with some exceptions. They all tend to become more and more insane as they reach old age, with no exceptions. They are compulsive hoarders of treasure. Some are so obsessed with it that they will avoid attacking with full force because they will undoubtedly damage the treasure in the process. Either way, they are going to murder whoever has the wealth, but there is a little sense in melting the victim that they're going to murder when their nice things will just be melted along with the victim. So they're not going to blast you with a fire blast and melt you and a 7-foot hole in the castle wall between them. So, linorms don't have the internal skeletal structure of a serpent, so they have a torso and ribcage that tapers to a long and powerful tail. They're far more flexible than the chromatic and metallic dragons. I'm just going to call them the modern dragons for the rest of this video, so they're dragon cousins. Okay, so let's look at the individual breeds, beginning with the epic monster, the Midgard linorm. The one and only offspring of the Midgard serpent, Jormungandr. The actual rival to Tiamat and Bahamut in sheer draconic power. So this thing is a mortal creature that has so much size and power that Bahamut and Tiamat would hesitate to go toe-to-toe with it. Unlike other linorm, Midgard has a pair of stumpy rear legs. Its front legs are the typical long and shapely size of other linorms and end in massive razor-sharp talons. It uses the rear legs mainly as a steering and leverage in land or in water. They're nowhere near as strong enough to support the massive weight of this gigantic beast. Just the head of Midgard is 50 feet wide and over 100 feet long. Its enormous maw has a double row of huge fangs, and the round eyes are without pupils, just a mirrored surface that reflects everything it sees. The body is covered with substantial blue, green, and silver scales that glisten like opals. The fangs are a translucent pale blue, like some sort of deep-sea fish, and Midgard is capable of unleashing 3 different breath weapons. The first is a 200-foot-long, 10-foot-wide boiling steam of water. Getting hit by this will hurl a medium or smaller target 100 feet back, maybe causing drowning and inflicting severe burns. The second breath weapon is a 200-foot long, 80-foot wide and 60-foot deep cloud of dust that can shred the flesh of the bones of its victims caught within it and cause asphyxiation from the coughing and choking. The last breath weapon is merely a strong exhale by this massive creature, creating a cone of wind 20 feet wide at its mouth, 200 feet long and 50 feet wide at its base, that slams into victims and sends them up to 200 feet back, with most loose objects caught in its path. So, while Midgard's attacks are legendary, and I mean getting constricted by a 500-foot-long body can crush the stone wall of a wizard's tower, Midgard considers physical combat beneath it. Unlike most other linorms, it has formidable psychic power, able to project telepathic communication over long distances and mentally speak with any other being that has a language. It is also a master of draconic spell magic, and this is how it prefers to interact with the world, through magic. It lairs deep beneath the bottom of the ocean, in entirely lightless caverns, in a cavern so large that even the Midgard has plenty of room to move around. Nestled in amongst the treasure of 1,000 kingdoms, it occasionally issues commands to 4 venerable sea Lenorms who serve it. The Midgard has no desire for coins and gems, so the sea Lenorms have treasure piles of their own laden with such wealth. Instead, the Midgard collects magical items and fabulous works of art. If it even does venture out of its lair, it will be to hunt, and it only needs food once every 40 to 50 years. It's mostly unconcerned with whatever else is going on in the world, but it does lay claim to the entire sea floor as its domain and amuses itself by manipulating the lives of other lesser Lenorms, frequently using them to subjugate and destroy any settlements or lairs that it feels are trespassing on its domain. No other Lenorm will ever challenge the Midgard, and in the few instances where Midgard has become annoyed or annoyed enough that's with some surface-dwelling adventurers who try to attack it, it made a special visit to the surface world and demolished entire cities along with the coast in retaliation, as a warning not to pester it again. So, in a situation where you've got that sort of thing occurring in your campaign world, some very famous individuals will get involved. So if it shows up on the Sword Coast, you can have the entire citadel of dwarves in the northern reaches emptying to fight this thing, along with you may even sacrifice the life of Elminster or various other avatars of Mistral or something like that will come down and try and sort this thing out, because it will literally devastate the entire Sword Coast. Now, I know more than a few of you are going to ask this, so how powerful is this creature really? Total immunity to weapons of less than +2 enchantment, total immunity to spells below level 3, all spell effects and breath weapon attacks by the Midgard impose a -3 penalty on any saving throws against it by its victims, even if they're saving with advantage. It is a disaster level threat, meaning it inflicts quadruple damage against structures, regenerates at a rate of 20 hit points per round, immune to charm, exhaustion, fear, paralysis, petrification, prone, poison, or being stunned. 3 times per day, legendary resistance, where it can just choose to pass a saving throw. Armor class of 25, over 700 hit points, resistant to fire, cold, lightning, acid, necrotic, thunder, and radiant damage. Cast spells as a level 14 wizard, a level 9 cleric, and a level 7 druid. Super genius, and about the only stat that's not at or near 30 is its dexterity, which is 10. If anyone manages to kill it, its body is instantly summoned to Hades by the goddess Hel and resurrected within the worm pits of the Corpse Gate, at which point those who killed it would be best advised to willingly imprison themselves in the 9th level Minimus Containment Gemstone spell, or stay very, very far away from any city to minimize civilian casualties as it comes back to kill them. Okay, next up we have the Corpse Terror Lenorm. Sounds terrible. Most definitely is awful. One of the most hideous and most feared of the Lenorms. They are 350 feet long, direct offspring of the epic worm called Corpse Terror. They are mottled brown, twisted and rough like a massive fallen tree with small and decrepit scales, all covered in violently noxious smelling slime. They have a head like a giant python, with a ragged and mangy mane of dirty brown and grey hair that it's matted and soaked with the gore of many, many corpses, so it actually looks like rotting flesh hanging off them, with patches of it sprouting all over their bodies, which just adds to the diseased and loathsome appearance of this thing. Catching full sight of one of these things when they first spring out of nowhere in a swift and brutal attack is a visceral kind of fear, which reminds me very much of the first time I saw an Australian funnel-web spider up close and personal many years ago. I was fully prepared to see a large and hairy spider come out of the ground. When that thing oozed out of its shame hole, I let out a very, very unmanly sound, and my body was suddenly moving away from it entirely of its own accord, and I realized that this prehistoric nightmare's ancestors would have caused the exact same reaction in dinosaurs and ancient tree shrews, because they are too hideous and evil to go extinct. Or perhaps they just can't die because, in their own small way, they are death itself. Anyway, I digress. This is kind of what Corpse Terror Lenorms are like. They look like they should be undead, but they're not. They look like they should be clumsy, ponderous, and slow, but they're not. They look like they should be mindless brutes, but again, they're not. They are brilliant and utterly evil. They are one of the Lenorm breeds that really enjoys fighting, getting up and close and tearing things apart. They won't let their lackeys do the murdering for them. They will throw them up against any serious threat that's possibly threatens them, while they beat a hasty retreat, because lackeys are good for dying. As far as the corpse terrors are concerned, they don't care about any other living creature other than themselves. Their breath weapons are both formidable. The first is a paralyzation cone 10 feet wide at its mouth, 50 feet wide at its apex, and extending 300 feet. The difficulty of the saving throw against this attack should be carefully considered. It is almost always the opening move that the Lenorm employs. They attack from the air by using the flying spell, and that's fairly common with Lenorms that learn magic, unleashing the paralysis breath, and then following immediately with their second form of breath weapon, which displays a phlegmy, revolting cloud of disease, 80 feet wide, 80 feet thick, and 100 feet long. The disease this gas inflicts are magically virulent, possessing of some arcane element of the Lenorm's own malice. Those who fail their saving throw take the full brunt of the necrotic damage, and about 1 to 6 rounds later, any living thing vulnerable to the disease must make a second saving throw or suffer one level of exhaustion as the infection demolishes their body from the inside. Unless they manage to pass 3 saving throws, each 1 to 6 rounds apart, they will suffer further levels of exhaustion, potentially killing them if they were already weakened. Plus, they don't get better. They each need to have the disease magically purged from them using Lesser Restoration, Healing Spell, Mass Heal, Raise Dead, Resurrection, True Resurrection, Hero's Feast, or a Wish Spell, or a magical item that can remove disease. Wearing a periaptive health could be a wise precaution before knowingly going into battle against the corpse terror, but whoever knows that they're knowingly going into battle against one? They just spring out of nowhere. They enjoy learning necromantic magic, and like all dragons, don't require anything but verbal components to cast spells. They prefer to immobilize, weaken, and terrify their victims before torturing them to death, and, as their name suggests, tearing apart and feeding on corpses, which they will generally leave for a while to get nice and ripe before they eat them. As you can imagine, they smell just about as bad as it is possible to smell, with the same stench cloud effect that troglodytes and ghasts have. Corpse terrors, like all the Lenorms, are very rare, and they choose to reside beneath large, important graveyards or royal necropolises. They create a hoard of ancient treasures and a sepulchre shrine to themselves, which, when they're resting there, somehow completely sustains them. So the nascent negative energy of that huge graveyard is what sustains them when they're down there. So they only feed on carcasses when they travel to the surface world. Next, we have the land Lenorm, greedy and the most commonly encountered of the rare Lenorms, because they have a habit of making up a lair in temperate hillsides where they can be found anywhere. They don't like going into Arctic terrain. They live in lairs of stone. The older land Lenorms become more and more magical in their powers, and they have concentrate on their ability to manipulate the rocky environment, to shape it, move through it, summon earth elementals, and also they learn how to shape themselves, polymorphing and sneaking about, always on the hunt for their obsession. Land Lenorms hate humanoids. They go out of their way to kill them, and this is a fairly common trait of all the Lenorms. They really hate humanoids, because they resent their ability to gather wealth of their own, as meagre as it is compared to the stupendous hoards that dragons accumulate. Still, this is the insane greed of dragons, particularly those evil villains, greedy and extremely cruel. The land Lenorms have 4 legs. The rear legs are powerfully muscled for burrowing through the ground, which serves the land Lenorms' habit of keeping out of sight while they size up their victims to further increase their stealth. They have small green gem-like green scales which become whatever colours the dragon wants them to be, so they can molt and change their appearance to camouflage themselves. They're also capable of mimicking sounds and quickly learn new languages, so they are typically right among their victims, polymorphs sometimes, when they suddenly reveal themselves and unleash their full fury, which can be absolutely terrifying because these things are hundreds of feet long. Compared to the first two Lenorms, the land Lenorms are much smaller, a mere 48 feet long, but they have an interesting breath weapon combining scorching heat that blasts out in a cone 5 feet wide from the mouth, 120 feet long, extending to 40 feet wide at the end of that range. The heat is not flame, it's really modified to kill creatures without melting their valuable possessions, so failing to save against it could cause blistering burns and inflict levels of exhaustion. There have been rare cases where a landlenorm is held off on murdering an entire frontier town simply because it extorted a wizard into teaching it everything it knew about magic, though this is only a temporary stay of execution. Lenorms don't keep promises to creatures they don't like, and they despise everything but themselves, so they're thoroughly untrustworthy. But of course, not everybody knows that. The Grey Lenorm is the smallest of the breeds. They're not prone to planning out their attacks before the combat occurs, and they are exceptionally devious in other ways, though. For example, they tend to magically disguise themselves as another form of dragon before they appear in front of the other creatures, including their victims, just in case there may be some chance that there will be some repercussions for whatever evil actions they're taking. In combat, they attack from on high, releasing a barrage of spells and their breath weapon, but they do this to weaken enemies before plunging in and attacking with their claws. Their disproportionately long, whipping tail is another key feature of the Grey Lenorm. When they first hatch, they appear smooth and glossy black, but the scales become dull and lead-grey as they age, and they can mentally control the shades of grey of their scales. Their magical powers develop slowly as they age. They're one of the few Lenorms which is relatively without magical power when they're born. And they also have a fairly eclectic, less predictable assortment of spell magic that they pick up over the years, so you never know what they're going to do. Their breath weapon is a confined jet of black acidic slime, 3 feet wide and 60 feet long. The slime is potent as a corrosive against both flesh and metal, dissolving armour and weapons unless the victims manage to douse themselves and their gear in water. Their tail has special glands that produce a wicked contact poison that also rots the flesh of anyone it touches, so they employ slashing attacks with the tail instead of biting, along with their slashing and tearing from their claws on their front legs. They are typical Lenorms in that they have no wings or rear legs. The Grey Lenorms prefer to lair in tight tunnels, located beneath peaks and ridges where they spend long hours overlooking the landscape, which they consider to be their personal property, everything they can see. They mate once every 2 or 3 decades, and the parents stay with their offspring until they pass from a hatchling stage into a young age category, which is fairly rare for Lenorms to do. They're also known to band together with other Grey Lenorms in order to devastate a large humanoid settlement or destroy some trading ships along a particular coastline. They do this sort of thing to ruin the efforts of humanoids to expand into new territory because they consider it a threat to themselves. I mentioned their habit of taking on the appearance of another dragon to shift the blame. Well, most of the time it will be a specific frost Lenorm or group of frost Lenorms that they're mimicking and they do this because the Grey Lenorms hate the frost Lenorms more than any other creature in existence. Grey Lenorms love to hoard coins above all other forms of treasure, and they love to eat cattle, sheep, deer, and goats, along with more than a few farmers who get in the way. And while I say that Grey Lenorms are the smallest of them all, when they reach ancient worm stage, they can be 480 feet long, with that wicked tail making up 2/3 of that length, so they're still enormous. The Frost Lenorm is extremely territorial, actively going out and prowling around a wide area in search of intruders that it can kill. They prefer to far frozen, frigid extreme north or south Arctic zones, but are prone to migrating into warmer lands in the deep winter months where the hunting is better. They hatch with fur covering their entire bodies, which sheds in favour of scales in all places other than the area between the head and the smallish arms, so they've kind of got a serpentine mane. They have a tendency to not grow to the same sort of enormous sizes as the other Lenorms, but unlike all other Lenorms, they are far more social amongst their own kind, living in family groups that would contribute to them being far more protective of their territorial resources, I guess. It makes sense if there's more of them concentrated in a particular area, they're going to be far more territorial. They are very well adapted to shaping ice into whatever form they wish, but they do this magically. Their lairs are palaces of frozen wonders and massive reflective mirror surfaces because they're very vain creatures, convinced that they're the most wondrous things to ever exist, spending long hours admiring their own image. They're also one of the more intelligent Lenorm breeds and spend a lot of time planning ways to absolutely ruin the lives of every other creature in the world, particularly the humans, whom they really hate. It's humans who dare to live in the harsh Arctic cold. Even detestable dwarves have enough humility to burrow down in the dirt beneath the Frost Lenorm's feet. So they carefully plan ways to draw out the strongest human heroes, weaken the towns by targeting supplies and trade, Then they destroy buildings and livestock in outlying areas, waiting for the desperation to set in before they launch a combined assault, murdering every living thing and leaving nothing but death and destruction in their wake. All is wrecked, apart from artwork, their most coveted form of treasure, which they take back to their lair to gloat over. Frostlenorms breathe a cloud of ice particles, as you imagine, 80 feet long and 60 feet wide and 40 feet high, and they are, of course, immune to cold. They are taught spell magic by their parents and are one of the few dragons to have passed on the ancient knowledge of potent rune magic from the days when all the dragons made war against the giants. Some of their spell magic is also really old, including a long-lost spell for transmuting metal into ice, which is extremely potent in combat. Sages have noted that Frostlenorms don't kill for food. They never eat any of their victims, but seem to eat snow and sustain themselves simply by inhaling freezing cold air. Interesting. The opposite of the Frostlenorm is, of course, the Flamelenorm, probably the most physically attractive of the various breeds, but also some of the rarest. They are dark iron black at hatching, fading to a dull grey when they reach young adult age, and suddenly they display this deep orange, and then as they grow older, the pulsing scarlet, appearing very much like a crackling inferno as they move about, and ancient Flamelenorms look like a raging inferno. So kind of spectacular. They hunt and devour all manner of creatures, preferring to eat them when they're on fire, and are very matter-of-fact when it comes to killing unintelligent creatures. Intelligent victims, though, well, Flamelenorms, much like red dragons, are obsessed with dominating and bending the will of other intelligent beings to their own, preferably by pure fear and intimidation. They are the dragons who will demand a village sacrifice their own children to it richly year after year to stay its wrath. The Flamelenorm is not doing this for the meal, it's doing it to dominate because it feeds on their insatiable ego. So, yeah, they do it to feel good. They breathe either a jet of super hot flame, 5 feet wide and 110 feet long, capable of melting plate armor and heavy metal shields. The best defense against it is actually a shield made from the dragon's own scales. They're also capable of belching a massive plume of searing hot gas and ash, 90 feet long, 70 feet wide, and 40 feet deep, which is easily hot enough to set flammable objects on fire. They are known to memorize every inch of their lair and surrounding territory, plus it is common for them to summon fire elementals to guard their lair, where they will either be out hunting around their lands or inside their lair counting out their inventory of treasure items. They rarely seek out a mate, and only those with the most impressive treasure hoard have very much success. So the treasure hoard is kind of like a display, like a peacock's tail. So that's why they're obsessed with it as well. Their offspring are left to fend for themselves, and usually the last hatchling standing is the one who's survived by killing and eating all of its siblings, which definitely is a trait of the Lenorms which contributes to how rare they are. They're obsessed with personal power from that day on, and thus their most prized possession is a treasure of magical items, which they store in their lairs deep beneath the earth, close to bubbling lakes of magma surrounded by summoned flame elementals. So, the Forest Lenorm is one of the more serpentine and evil-looking Lenorm breeds. They have a leering, perpetually snarling look about their dragon heads. Hatching, they look like long green lizards with 4 short legs. As they grow to adult size, the front legs grow and the front and rear legs atrophy and eventually disappear. So at the young adult age, they're green and brown, camouflage patterned serpents with dragon heads. Well adapted to twisting and slithering through any sort of overgrown terrain and among the trunks and branches of trees. Adult forest Lenorms are around 150 feet long and can spit a line of acid that has the added effect of withering both plants and the limbs of animals, including humanoids. You can represent this debilitating effect by inflicting a level of exhaustion and perhaps, if the limb is an arm, disadvantage when attacking with double-handed weapons, if they can do it at all. Just, for fun and giggles, until that limb is magically restored. Forest Lenorms are not the most book-smart of the various breeds, but they are cunning and masters of sneak attacks. They're also naturally invisible to all non-intelligent creatures, which you can play. If you play it right as a DM, it can be very memorable. Say the player characters are stalking some deer for their dinner, and it's deep and peaceful, The deer are just browsing on some fern fronds. Then there's a slow, deep inhalation of air behind the player characters, and they turn suddenly as a huge shadow falls over them, and the forest Lenorm has stalked up behind them, but the deer can't actually see it. But oh boy, the players sure can. Thankfully, no more than a single forest Lenorm can be found within 100 square miles of any other one, and that would be considered a territory swarming with them. They're very rare. They are capable of casting illusion magic and manipulating the terrain with limited druidic magic, but are just as likely to wait until the characters fall victim to one of the many traps that they set in their hunting range, particularly pit traps. One other thing to note is that the forest Lenorms hate beautiful objects and creatures. They will usually attack the most charismatic or attractive member of the adventuring party first, out of sheer hatred and spite. The Rain Lenorm is also supernaturally vain and egotistical creature to absurd levels. They will demand adoration from all other creatures, at the same time taking pride in proclaiming the greatness of the horrific atrocities they've committed against others. It's like, on the one hand, they're boasting about how they're the most infamous mass murderer, and on the other hand, they're strutting around and just expecting every other creature to shower them with compliments and trip over themselves in their haste to make their every whim of the Rain Lenorm a reality. So when the reality of things fail to match up with the Lenorm's expectations, they fly into a deep and terribly cruel rage. Also, good news, the older they get, the worse this becomes, until they are hopelessly and horrifically insane. And it's fairly common to all Lenorms, but the Rain Lenorms are textbook examples of this kind of insanity. They have teardrop-shaped scales that shift colour between greys, greens and blues. They usually lair deep in twisting mazes of chambers, some full of treasure. They are so covetous and paranoid that they will seek out and kill any intelligent creatures near their lair, just in case one of them discovers where the lair and their treasure is. If they suspect that knowledge of their lair's location has spread, they will gather up every little scrap that they own and move to a new location. They only move around outside their lair when the weather is raining and stormy, because they feed on lightning bolts. However, their breath weapon is not lightning. It's actually a high-pressure stream of boiling water, 3 feet wide and 90 feet long. The Sea Lenorms are cold-hearted terrors of the deep that constantly plot to destroy human shipping, constructions and settlements along the coastline. They consider all sea life to be their own personal property and resent any surface creature engaging in the act of fishing, an offence worthy of a death sentence. They appear almost transparent when they hatch and swiftly gain the ability to change the colour of their scales at will. Plus, they grow a set of wicked tail barbs that they use very effectively in combat, much like the spiked tail of the alien in the movie of the same name. They can spear it out. Adult sea Lenorms are over 200 feet long, so they can certainly capsize a ship even the size of a small caravel. They are known to slither up onto the shore at night and unleash a fast assault of deadly magical fog and gales of wind, blasting and poisoning, tearing buildings down and gobbling up the panicked and terrified population before retreating back into the sea. Their breath weapon is a caustic cloud of acid, 60 feet long, 60 feet wide and 30 feet high. They only use this when they're out of the water and combine it with the magical fog spells that they have mastered. They lair deep underwater in multi-chambered flooded caverns, gathering giant turtles and giant squids as pets, and maybe even something like a kraken if the sea Lenorm is ancient and mighty, and it has grown to its full enormous size. Their treasure hoards are typically the spoils that they've taken from sunken ships and the devastated warehouses of rich trading ports over the years. Despite their huge size, they eat very little, and their diet consists entirely of seaweed, particularly dried seaweed, which they gather up and leave on the shore to dry, and they will react very violently to anyone who tries to steal it. So, good luck, and don't touch the seaweed. Finally, the very impressive and unusual Dread Lenorm, which I think is my favourite. They have 2 heads. Adults are around 60 feet long and live in desolate locations far from other Lenorms and any other wretched humanoids that they hate so much. They live in deep, twisting mazes of caverns that they fill with all manner of traps to confuse and kill potential thieves of their scattered treasure hoard, which is usually heaped up into disorganized and filthy piles that the Lenorms just sleep on. They gather up treasure, but they don't really value it. They attack with almost no provocation, but do so in terrain that they've chosen well beforehand and prepared carefully to provide them with every advantage. They have no idea what the concept of a fair fight is. Such a thing would be seen as insanity by a Dread Lenorm. Their breath weapon is different for each of their 2 heads. One will breathe a cone of magical cold wind, a freezing gale that kills and blasts foes backwards. The others are a cloud of super hot dust, which has a lower range and mostly reserved for the second round of combat. The first round will always be a potent spell attack, then the hot blast, followed by the thunderous gale of freezing cold wind. The few lucky and very tough cookies who withstand the assault now have the somewhat undivided attention of the Dread Lenorm and a brutal physical assault, mauling coming their way, much like a few tons of sharp and gnashy bricks. A ton of bricks. Dread Lenorms are immune to charm and enchantment cells because their two heads work in concert with each other, not really having separate personalities. They study magic and develop potent mental powers such as telekinesis, power words, innovation, all sorts of charms and dominating magics. They breed more out of pure instinct and don't really give a damn about their treasure hoard. It's the taking of precious possessions of others that they desire. If Lenorms and other dragons could make a jewel out of every lesser creature whose life they took, these would be their most precious gems. On that note, I'll call this extensive catalogue of all the ancient and rare Lenorms done and dusted. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will make rare use of them in your future games. As always, let me know if you do and how it went, and be sure to let your players, traumatised that they are, let them know that I say hi. Just a reminder, if you've not subscribed already, feel free to do so. Be sure to hit that notification bell as I upload from the other side of the world sometime in your future. For access to all the scripts and 1 week advance access to these videos, consider becoming a patron of the channel on Patreon from a minimum of just $1 per month. Hearty thank you to all of the patrons who do so. Join the community on our Discord server, come say hi. Also, if you want to pick up a new video game at a significant daily discount and help me out in the process, check out the daily deal on Chrono, link down below. Also, there's an affiliate link for Patron Blades, a very good subscription razor blade service, which I'm going to be making hearty use of, as meagre as my beard is. As always, thanks for listening, everybody. I'll be back with more for you again very soon. Hey everybody, AJ back again for the Mighty Glue Stick channel, creating the most comprehensive collection of dragon ecologies I can because you told me to. Carrying on, we come to the Ferris dragons. Now, originating in the June 1991 Dragon magazine number 170 in an article by Jason M. Walker, these dragons do not have a story origin specific to any of the known realms, not Kryn, not Greyhawk, not Forgotten Realms. Narath of 4th edition hadn't been invented yet, perhaps they came from there. You don't have any evidence to place them anywhere except for the...
Vil du have en bærbar, du ikke skal oplade 10 gange om dagen? Det er tid til at skifte til en Chromebook med op til 12 timers batteri.
Hey there everyone, AJ back again for the Mighty Glue Stick channel. I make videos about Dungeons & Dragons lore full-time and have a huge collection of videos. This week, I was digging around in a lot of old lore and found some things I just wanted to share, as well as inspire some ideas for your games that will catch a lot of your players who think they know everything about D&D. Magic items often present a problem to the Dungeon Master because if the monster can make use of them, so can the player characters. Well, there is a way around that you might not have considered. We all know that liches are individuals who have turned to profane rituals, in the most cases, and undeath in order to extend their existence on the mortal world and devote themselves to the study of magic. So I ask you, when was the last time you provided a whole heap of highly specialized magic items for your lich to use? In an article from Dragon Magazine issue 234, published October 1996, written by Jonathan M. Richards, there are 9 magic items that are made by and used by liches that either don't work for living creatures or are highly dangerous for living creatures to even attempt to use. Liches are directly connected to the plane of negative energy, so much so that their very touch can super chill and paralyze living beings. This energy flowing through them can be harnessed by items to perform as if they were enchanted, but without the lich's innate powers, they simply don't work. A perfect example are the black fire wands, as twisted and black as the hearts of the foul creatures involved in their creation. Usually tipped with an opaque crystal, they're often carved with minute magical runes into which molten silver is poured carefully. Unlike most other wands, a black fire wand has no charges of its own, acting instead as a channeling device. With it, a lich is able to focus its aura of absolute cold into a narrow beam of dark energy capable of striking a single target at any range within sight, within reason. Like the lich's touch, the beam inflicts 3d6 cold damage, but it has no paralyzation effects. No saving throw is allowed, although creatures normally immune to cold damage are unharmed by the wand's beam, obviously. Since the wands merely focus energy from the lich's link to the negative material plane, they're useless in the hands of any other creature, though you can craft different variations for other undead, perhaps an intangible wand for a wraith, or you might want a wand that channels the short-range life disruption of the lich to fire that necrotic damage over a much larger 120-foot range. Next on our list, an amulet of the undead can be used by only an intelligent undead creature, such as a lich or vampire, who has that innate connection to the negative energy plane. It consists of a golden disc about 3 inches in diameter with various gemstones of different colours set in a circular pattern along the outer edge. Each of the gemstones represents a different type of undead, such as a vampire, a lich, a ghost, and so on, determined at the time of the amulet's creation. This amulet is worn around the neck, often as a necklace of human finger bones. By means of the amulet, the lich can detect the location of the nearest undead creature by tracing its link to the negative material plane. To do this, the lich must hold the amulet in their hand and spend 1 round in concentration holding perfectly still. At this point, one of the gemstones begins to glow. The brightness of the glow indicates the proximity of the undead creature to the lich. The brighter the glow, the nearer the being. If the lich continues concentrating while slowly turning in a circle, the amulet's gemstone indicates information to the closest type of undead in general proximity in each direction surrounding the lich. The usual range of this detection is quite broad, about 100 miles at least. An amulet of the undead can be very useful to a lich, enabling it to track down undead allies. Also, because it is tracking them due to their link to the negative energy plane, the amulet can see right through stone and even lead. It would be very handy for enemies of the undead, but without that innate negative energy connection, they simply can't use it. Another amulet, the Bone Briar, is carved from bone and usually has its command word inscribed in plain sight on the front. It's almost always circular, with rays of varying length projecting in all directions from like a twisted compass or the madman's carving of the sun. It's typically made from, say, a segment of spine that's been cut through, and when activated, the lich's bones sprout thorn-like protuberances. These bone briars cause an additional 1d4 piercing damage to anyone struck physically by the lich. Anyone deliberately trying to physically restrain the lich suffers 1d8 piercing damage from the numerous bony spines. The bone briars will remain in place until the lich deactivates them by calling out the command word for a second time, at which point the spines melt back into the lich's bones as if they weren't there in the first place. The lich suffers no damage at all from forming or receding of the bone briars, but if a living person activates the amulet while holding it or wearing it by speaking the command word, they are most likely going to die quite suddenly, painfully, and gruesomely, as their skeleton sprouts spines and shreds them, perforating organs and flesh all over the body from the inside out. Basically, they drop to 0 hit points and need to make death saving throws. However, without magical healing, they will most certainly die, as they take 1d6 piercing damage per round and remain totally paralysed until someone figures out how to deactivate the amulet or cast a wish spell to save them. Because of the damage such an amulet can cause to living beings, liches will often leave Bonebriar amulets poorly guarded in their lairs, hoping to tempt and punish those who would intrude upon them and steal their stuff. In typical devious fashion, the amulets are often stored in an untrapped wooden box along with bogus instructions claiming the amulets have powers of protection from the undead, regeneration, or any number of beneficial effects. The item is not technically cursed, by the way. It performs what it was made to do quite well. Items that allow the lich to operate in living society are also highly valued by these undead. Gauntlets of aura suppression are simply a pair of well-made leather or linen gloves that negate the cold and paralytic touch of the lich. Combined with a powerful staff of the flesh, plus some disguise enchantments, and the lich can pass people in the street without causing a stir. A staff of the flesh is fashioned from a sturdy, twisted branch of lightly coloured wood, often bleached until it takes on an almost bone-like colour. This magical staff serves two purposes for the lich. First, it can be used as a weapon, striking as a +2 staff. In addition, a lich can cause the staff to, have the living opponent's skin and organs shrivel up to nothingness, leaving behind a pile of bones, clothing, and equipment. In other words, some serious necrotic damage, and a hefty DC 18 Constitution saving throw. This essentially takes the Lich's Disrupt Life legendary action and instills it as a series of charges in a magical weapon. But wait, there's more. In addition to the 6d6 necrotic damage on a failed save, if the victim is reduced to 0 hit points, they don't get death saves because the staff has sucked their life force, their soul, right out of their body and into itself. The victim can't be raised from the dead or resurrected because the soul is imprisoned. Only by touching the staff to the flesh of the victim's remains and invoking its command word can the soul be returned to the body along with any stolen life force, actually healing the body back to what it was. But wait, there's more. The lich can draw on that life force present in the staff of the flesh to clothe itself, its own bones, in flesh for up to 24 hours. This magical effect gives the lich the exact appearance they had in life, regardless of the appearance of their victim. In this fashion, the lich can pass close inspection as one of the living. The only hint as to the artificial nature of this appearance is that the lich's body will radiate a faint magical aura under the scrutiny of an appropriate spell or magic item. Furthermore, being clothed in flesh does not prevent the lich from using their paralytic touch, unless of course they're wearing the gauntlets of aura suppression as well. The staff of the flesh can only hold the life force of a single victim at a time, thankfully, but there's no disadvantage to the lich using the stored life force even in the middle of battle, but just for giggles, and to torment any opponents who know how evil what they just casually did was. Often a lich will drain the life force of a player character or very important NPC or animal companion of a player character and use that victim as a hostage, forcing the party members to do the lich's bidding in order to earn back their comrade's life. Liches occasionally have unexpected weaknesses though, one of which are items called memory globes. Often in the early stages of lichdom, a lich becomes despondent over what they've lost, the price they paid for their immortality, memories of loved ones and of time spent in the company of friends, human things. These can be distractions for a power-hungry lich. For this reason, many liches early on create memory globes to help them deal with such annoyances. In appearance, a memory globe looks like a simple crystal ball, although these items often seem to be filled with distorting, hazy, misty, shifting, wavering images inside the glass like the heat mirage in the desert. It's been filled at the time of its creation with the memories of the lich that they no longer wish to have. These memories inhabit the globe. When touched, the memory globe displays random images of the memories it contains. Since they were purged from its mind during the creation of the globe, the images are meaningless to the lich. However, the memory globe is a two-edged sword. With the creation of such a device, it can be extremely useful to the lich, expedient to allowing them to forget about the painful parts of their past existence that they can never have again. It can be a deadly weapon in the hands of enemies, though. If discovered by an enemy, the images in the globe can be very revealing, perhaps giving away some weakness of the lich that can be used against them. Additionally, if the globe is shattered, the memories immediately return in full force to the Lich, a traumatic experience which stuns them for 1d4 rounds. While stunned, the Lich is unable to move or take any actions, and they're at their most vulnerable. For this reason, Lich's memory globe is usually well hidden and protected, as is their phylactery. Memory globes are not inherently evil in nature and can conceivably be made by player character wizards if the procedures were properly researched. However, each memory globe is a single-use item, able to hold only the selected memories of the wizard creating it, and unable to be erased other than by its destruction. Furthermore, there are a few instances where a living player character wizard would find it necessary to purge their own memories in such a fashion, but it would be pretty rare. I wonder actually, could a high-level wizard construct globes that contain memorized spells, like a crystal scroll that they smash in the middle of combat, staggering back as the recollection hits them, and wham, extra fully charged spell slot, ready to go? Could they protect themselves from enemies with the power to negate their memorized spells in this way? Food for thought, and a great one-shot spell item that can't be replicated in the same way a high-level spell scroll can. Of course, Liches also have some serious advantages over the living, such as not needing to breathe, so they can fill their lair with poison gas, or just a total lack of oxygen. To make sense, it also helps preserve their books and scrolls and fine robes. But there are other sneaky tricks, such as using yellow mould. Liches like yellow mould. This mould spore clouds are deadly to living organisms, yet can't harm the lich, as it doesn't breathe. Liches often have patches of yellow mould growing in the entrances of their hidden lairs, as one level of defence against intrusion by the living. Some liches have investigated and experimented with yellow mould to great extent, developing potions of yellow mould distillate. These potions are extracts from yellow mould spores magically suspended in liquid and mutated to have extremely fast-acting effects when they come into contact with living or once-living flesh. As expected, this distillate is a cloudy yellow colour, often with clots of grey-green or milky white substances floating in the mixture. When a potion of yellow mould distillate is quaffed, the drinker's flesh and organs are transformed into yellow mould in the space of a single round, exploding into a 10-foot cloud of spores the following round. If this sounds like something that a character is not going to survive, you're quite correct. It's an instant kill. The drinker collapses into a pile of bones, and those caught within the cloud spore must make a DC 20 Constitution saving throw, or suffer 66 poison damage themselves. As liches are found in varying stages of decay, those that still retain a layer of mummified leathery skin are able to drink the potion of yellow mould distillate themselves, transforming their remaining skin into a deadly cloud of spores. As the yellow mould distillate doesn't eat away bone, the lich is not discomforted by the lack of skin and organs. The lich is not harmed in any way by this action. However, his opponents are not so lucky. Not only must they deal with the spore cloud, but such a display is absolutely terrifying. A wisdom save versus fear is entirely appropriate. Now, combine this with the Staff of Flesh, and the lich could do this multiple times. Lich has also been known to chain living captives in a location leading to their inner lairs and leave one of these potions unmarked within reach of the victim. After several days without food and water, most captives eventually give in to their thirst and take a chance with the potion. Hey presto, handy new patch of yellow mould in the lair and a freshly stripped skeleton for the lich to animate. Next on the list is an item the fashionable lich on the go sometimes creates. A nightmare harness is a leather and precious metal horse harness studded with assorted gems that gleam with an inner fire. But be wary, if removed from the harness, each of the gems carries a horrible curse, subjecting any living being who possesses one to suffer from dreams in which they are chased over a desolate, barren wasteland by a vicious, flame-snorting nightmare. Each night the gem remains with the thief. They must make a Constitution saving throw that gets cumulatively worse with each night. First night it's DC 12, next it's DC 13, until they inevitably fail and gain a level of exhaustion. If they reach 6 levels of exhaustion, they die. Anyway, the harness allows a lich to summon a nightmare within 1d4 minutes, which willingly serves the lich indefinitely. If the nightmare is killed, the harness crumbles to dust. If a creature other than an evil undead summons the nightmare, it's going to do its very best to kill them. That's just how they roll. Check out my video on Pegasi and nightmares to learn the horrific origin of these cursed creatures. Finally, what self-respecting intelligent lich or vampire would find itself without a brooch of turning resistance? Of course they would find a way to avoid the most annoying of the powers of divine servants. Similar to a brooch of shielding, this magical brooch allows the lich to resist being turned. When a priest or paladin is attempting to turn the lich and the die roll indicates success, instead of the lich being turned, one charge of the brooch of turning resistance is burned up. When created, the brooch has 2d8 plus 8 charges and it crumbles to dust when the last one is expended. They're usually made from platinum, carved to look like a grinning skull with rubies for eyes. Obviously, such an item is worthless to the living creatures, but if a paladin or cleric decided to take the thing, it's made of precious metal after all, they are now suddenly and sneakily vulnerable to being turned by servants of evil divine gods as though they were undead. Lovely. Got to give it to liches, they have a very, very dark sense of humour. Let's have a little competition, shall we? Those who wish to participate, type the word competition in all caps and then comment with your idea of a magic item that an undead creature could use that a living player character could not. The one I think is best, I will reply with winner in all caps, and then you can email me your address and I will send you a free set of metal dice. I might even select multiple winners, so put your thinking caps on and just show me what you got. Please hit the like button if you've made it this far, subscribe if you like what I do, check out my Patreon for all the full scripts for these videos, buy some sweet merchandise from my Teespring shop, wear your geek with pride, and always, thanks for listening, and I'll be back with more for you very soon. Hey there everyone, AJ back again for the Mighty Gluestick channel. I make videos about Dungeons & Dragons lore full time, and I recently ran a quick competition where people had to design a magic item usable by intelligent undead, but pretty much useless or very dangerous for living creatures. Here are the 4 winners who have a giant metal D20 mood dice and full metal prismatic dice set on their way to them right now. Plus, I have a few items that certainly needed an honourable mention after the competition. This has been a lot of fun, so you can expect some more creative giveaways on this channel in the future, and I would love if you would suggest what theme the next magic item competition should be about. Say, merfolk, dragon items, you name it. Okay, on with the winners.